Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. With the reinstatement of a Holocaust denier in Palm Beach County and a Texas administrator ordering educators to provide opposing literature on the Holocaust, are we witnessing the fulfillment of prophecy spoken by General Dwight D. Eisenhower? On today's podcast, I have invited Dr. Beverly Newman to talk about an event that happened in Germany that was the flame that ignited Hitler's final solution to the Jewish question. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that shines the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza-Moore. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org. I also want to remind you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues. Our goal at PJTN is to equip you to stand against the disinformation by taking back local control of your community and your children's and grandchildren's education. The first step to that process is education. We must become informed. Remember to visit our website daily to receive updates on all of PJTN's groundbreaking initiatives and programs, and sign up to receive PJTN's media and action alerts to share with family and friends. As a PJTN Watchman, your action could mean all the difference in the success of our global mission to combat the enemy that is trying to rob our children of their future. So please, help me spread this vital information today. In the Bible, we are commanded to teach our children the Word of God as stated in Joel chapter 1, verse 3. Tell your children about it. Let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. That's 3 generations of children who are to be taught about God's covenant with Israel and the Exodus from Egypt. Unfortunately, we have failed miserably, and we are witnessing the evidence of that in our classrooms today. So what can we do to take back local control of our community? What are some actions that must be taken to reverse the course we are currently on? We are witnessing parents and citizens nationwide who are mobilizing against the propaganda and history revisionism being peddled to our children. And now we are even witnessing anti-Semitism and Holocaust revisionism in their curriculum. Organizations and institutions that were once considered respected and trusted have bought into the anti-American, anti-Judeo-Christian narrative and can no longer be trusted. More and more teaching organizations like the National Education Association, as well as teachers' unions and the National School Board Association, have bought into this propaganda and are actively pushing this effort that will ultimately destroy our republic unless we engage. On a previous podcast, we discussed the National School Board Association's letter to the Biden administration to designate parents and citizens who attend school board meetings to hold their local school board members accountable for the policies and curriculums they are peddling to our children. In response, Attorney General Merrick Garland essentially issued a declaration of war in a memo to weaponize the FBI, including the criminal division of U.S. attorneys in 14,000 school districts across the U.S., addressing threats against school administrators, board members, teachers, and staff, stating that in the next 30 days, the department will announce a series of measures designed to address the rise of supposed criminal conduct directed towards school personnel. Who is the target of the investigation? Parents and grandparents, moms and dads. It's not Antifa who murdered people in the streets, destroyed public and private property. No. Nor is it the Black Lives Matter who launched a modern-day pogrom in Los Angeles. No. It's law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. We are the target of our Attorney General. This is outrageous. And as if that were not enough, we were told that the Palm Beach County school principal, who was fired for suggesting that the Holocaust didn't happen the way history has recorded it, was reinstated with back pay. Additionally, another education administrator in a Dallas-Fort Worth school district ordered teachers to provide books that taught an opposing perspective on the Holocaust narrative. On this week's podcast, I have invited Dr. Beverly Newman, the director of the Al Katz Holocaust Center. Dr. Newman, welcome to Proclaiming Justice.
Thank you, Lori. It's an honor to be able to address this urgent crisis for our families and children.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to help us understand this growing trend and the threat to the memory of the Holocaust. And I'm so grateful for all the work that you've done. You've been an incredible inspiration and confidant in this process as we have been working through the Holocaust standards in the state of Florida and finding good Holocaust education. So I just want to thank you so much for the work that you do and just give you the kudos that you deserve for being such an incredible advocate and trying to get the truth out about this important part of history. You know, it was my first encounter with Holocaust educators, Dr. Newman, who wanted to universalize the Holocaust in the K-12 Holocaust standards in Florida that brought my attention to this growing Holocaust revisionist movement. What do you think is happening? Why are these incidents related? And, you know, you've been involved in Holocaust education for years. Is this a trend that you're noticing?
Absolutely. It is a trend, a fad, but much deeper and more sinister than that, in which our young people and actually multiple generations have virtually no concept of what was the Holocaust. And they use the term Holocaust with indiscretion because they don't know what it is. It was the systematic, computerized annihilation of Jews all over Europe, Asia, and Africa. So it was not just confined to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
It was 3 different continents, and the Nazis were here in America. They were off of our Atlantic coast from, I believe, Maine, all the way around the peninsula of Florida with U-boats. And people on shore in America could actually see the U-boats or the boats. People inside of the U-boats could see the people on the shore.
Wow, that is a part of the history that I wasn't even aware of. That is shocking to even think. I knew that there were the brown shirts were here up in New England. I know that there were Nazi sympathizers. Of course, we know with Ford. You know, Ford was a big supporter of the Nazis. In fact, Hitler gave him one of the most prestigious awards. So there were Nazi sympathizers in the United States.
Absolutely. And not only sympathizers, they were promoters. Ford bought a newspaper in Dearborn, Michigan to publicize and promote Nazi ideology, including the protocols of the elders of Zion.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did he do it through this newspaper, but he published the protocols of the elders of Zion and had a very, very classic, rabidly anti Semitic book, but he had those distributed through his dealerships across the United States.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he was very supportive of Father Coughlin, who was also up in that area, to broadcast vehemently anti Semitic messages to the American people constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
People like Edison, etc. Actually, Ford and Edison, Thomas Edison, lived virtually side by side. And if you go down to southern Florida, you can see their mansions, as I said, virtually side by side.
Wow.
They were
Wow.
they were very, very strong eugenicists. And Nazi ideology is heavily based upon eugenics,
Mm.
being the belief system that some people are innately inferior and have no right to be born.
Mm. Wow. Wow. That is amazing. And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who are listening in Tennessee or are following the Ford Foundation, actually, the governor of Tennessee has just brought the Ford Motor Company into Tennessee. We are going to be hosting a plant in Shelbyville or Shelby County in West Tennessee, the Memphis area. And you know, when I heard about this announcement, it really disturbed me because I know the history of Henry Ford and I know about his publication in Dearborn. It's very disturbing to think that this was actually acceptable thought at that time. And as if, the battle we are facing in classrooms across this nation for the minds of our children wasn't bad enough with the onslaught of what Beverly is talking about, but critical race theory. And of course, the 1619 Project and the anti-Semitic, anti-American, and anti-Judeo-Christian Black Lives Matter curriculum. Our polls are beginning to confirm that we must re-educate Americans, especially American children, about these truths regarding the Holocaust history, regarding the truth about American history. There were times, I remember when we were producing a documentary, The Forgotten People, Christianity and the Holocaust, which our audience can go to our website to access. But I remember seeing the signs posted on the beach in Florida, where I was born and raised in Fort Lauderdale, that stated, "No Jews, no dogs allowed." And never in a million years would I have ever thought to see anything like that. But we know that Holocaust history is being altered, it's being revised, it's being minimized in our classrooms. We found that in one poll, and Dr. Newman, you can speak to this, but in one poll, over 50% of students didn't know what the Holocaust was. And then in other polls that did talk about students who knew what the Holocaust was, they didn't know that 6 million Jews were annihilated. Dr. Newman, what are your comments? What are your thoughts about this? Because this is actually shocking that many American kids are completely clueless about this horrific event in history.
We are not teaching the Holocaust, plain and simple. Now, obviously, when I say we, that does not include every school or every classroom or every school system. But by and large, throughout this country, we are not teaching the Holocaust. And what do I mean by teaching the Holocaust? Is it reading one story one time in a child's entire classroom career? No. Is it showing one film one time or having a field trip? I often hear from educators, well, we had a field trip to the Holocaust Museum. And not to discount that, but there is so much more depth that needs to be conveyed to our children. Why? Because our children are drowning in terms of not knowing how to navigate a world full of propaganda and lies, as in the Holocaust. We have not taught our American children how to siphon out the lies, the propaganda, the deceptions that are hitting them, bombarding them everywhere. And the children deserve to know how to navigate the world. Now,
Absolutely.
how does Holocaust education actually teach children to navigate the world? Because it's all about decision making. And I often say to my students that I teach Holocaust education, there were no good decisions in the Holocaust. Because let's say you want to save your friend who is about to be beaten or starve to death or get some other kind of lethal exposure. When you decide that, which would be noble and courageous, you are also threatening your own life. And it may be that you and your friend both sacrifice your lives in order to save your friend's life. That happened all the time in the Holocaust. So every decision in the Holocaust had untold ramifications that could cost your life or other lives. My father, when he had to be out of his unit in order to relieve himself, and it was bitter, bitter cold. I mean, we're talking 52 below zero with almost no clothing and almost no food. He knew that if he did not get back into a unit, that it was likely that 10 of his fellow Jews would be murdered on the spot by the Nazis, because that was one of their ratios, that for everyone who deserts or is not where he should be, etc., 10 more Jews will die.
Wow.
These are lessons that you cannot possibly teach any other way than in the context of reality. And the Holocaust is the worst reality and also the best in terms of how many people made sacrifices beyond imagination just to save their lives and to honor God.
Yes.
The
Yes.
Jews would observe the holidays, the Jewish holidays, in the worst conditions in order to honor God. And my dad, even though he was starving for 7 years, he was one of the longest slaves, or one of the Jews in slavery, the longest,
Mm.
would observe Yom Kippur, the fast day. He
Mm.
would not eat when he was starving.
Wow.
Yom Kippur. So
Wow.
there are lessons in terms of choices that people have and ramifications and consequences of choices, in terms of options that you may or may not see, that can only be taught well through the Holocaust. And it's much more than a field trip or a movie or a story.
Yes. You bring up your father, you have your own personal story about a horrific event that some suggest was the beginning of Hitler's execution of the final solution to the Jewish question, the night of broken glass, or otherwise known as Kristallnacht. Could you tell our audience what happened that night to your family?
My father was a teenager. He's at home with the whole family. It was a family of 5 children and 2 parents. The Nazis come and kidnap my grandfather, take him to Buchenwald concentration camp. Now, this is 1938, so long before America entered World War II. November 9th, 1938, they kidnapped my grandfather, Louis Katz, Katz, and they put him in Buchenwald, where he was tortured. There were 30,000 Jewish men on that night that were rounded up to go to concentration camps.
Mm.
Many of them never came out.
Mm.
My grandfather did, but he was very much adversely affected and traumatized by what he saw in that camp. And I
Mm.
won't go into the details because it is just sickening,
Mm.
absolutely sickening. My father went through the back window and he saw his synagogue burning to the ground.
Mm.
In Hanover, which is where the family was at that time, the synagogue was the center of Jewish life. Every Jewish family went to synagogue every week. And when you burn down a synagogue, that is a message to every Jew that you are not long in this city and this country and this world.
Mm.
So my father, as a teenage boy, is watching his synagogue burn down and later on put into slave labor for the next 7 years. So from November 9th, 1938 until May 1st, 1945, my dad was a Jewish slave.
Mm.
This is also an imperative lesson of the Holocaust, that there were Jewish slaves by the millions. 6 million perished, but
Mm-hmm.
millions of them and millions more were slaves to the Nazis. And we're talking about a slavery that meant death. The purpose of slavery in the Holocaust was to kill off every possible Jew. And as I said a few moments ago, we're not talking Jews in Europe alone. We're talking about Jews worldwide, including the United States of America.
Mm.
So our
Wow.
family has a horror history connected with Kristallnacht. And I want to just address a couple of things. When we say re-educate Americans, we have to be careful with that term because that's the concept that's being used to re-educate in a liberal sense.
Yes.
So that there are proposals for re-education camps in different countries. And of course, that is exactly what goes on in China. And these are the equivalent of concentration camps, and millions of people today worldwide are being re-educated, indoctrinated to believe in communism, socialism, to believe that our power lies not in God, but our power lies in a government that is in control of all things.
So this is a dangerous trend that you're talking about, and I'm glad you bring this up. This is a disturbing trend that we're watching unfold. And I bring this up because, Hitler, during the rise of the Nazis, Hitler was a National Socialist. And of course, we also know that communism was also on the rise. And this was, Hitler was not only targeting Europe, but they were also targeting the Soviet Union. And so there was this battle going on. But do you see this same trend occurring in the United States now?
What I see is socialism, socialism, socialism. And socialism is communism. I see that people are supposed to do what they're told, even when the elites do not have to do the same things, even when there is no rational basis. They are told what to do. And if you don't do, and today's really a landmark for that, if you do not do what you're told to do, you lose your job. You lose your livelihood. You lose your dignity. You lose your ability to support your family. And the emphasis I see, socialism, 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 is family is nothing. Family is something that we see more and more elites shunning and denouncing, and as you said, even calling domestic terrorists. These people that take up their time in order to attend boring, usually, meetings of school boards, etc., and I've sat through many myself, are devoted to trying to instill in their children and their leaders community service and dedication. They want the community to be uplifted, elevated.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, these people are not destroyers. Terrorists are destroyers. They are
Right.
anarchists.
Mm-hmm.
When you attend a meeting, you are not trying to destroy, you are trying to uplift and elevate. The motive and the motif are entirely,
Mm-hmm.
entirely different. So I see in aspects of our American lives to the nth degree socialism written all over them, and very, very, very tragically. Plus, you have to realize if you're on the elite group making these decisions, that
Mm-hmm.
you, people on your side can be a danger to you, not people on the other side, people on your side. This is where we got, excuse me, the night of the long knives,
Mm-hmm.
when Hitler eliminated his top Nazis. He had them murdered.
Mm.
And we see this in other countries as well,
Yes.
where the people at the very top of the regime are the first to be eliminated.
Mm-hmm.
So no one is safe in a climate of extreme hate and destruction. And again,
Right.
terrorism is destruction, it's not elevation.
You know, it's interesting that we're having this conversation because as you're talking, I'm thinking about the political prisoners actually who are sitting in jail in Washington, D.C. as we speak. I believe it's over 600 people who are being charged with insurrection on January 6th in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol. But these people are basically being held against their will. They're not being released. They're being accused of this insurrection when the facts have come out that it was actually the FBI that was helping to institute this and to create the havoc that was going on, to create this scenario. You know, I'm sitting here listening to you talk and I'm thinking about what happened, you know, with the reign of the Nazis, and I'm thinking about what's happening in our country. And these people can't even see their family members. Some of which are being held in solitary confinement. And you know, we have to ask ourselves the question: could what happened in Germany happen in the United States of America, the freest country, supposedly, the freest country in the world? What has happened to us?
Lori, it's already happening. I can give you two spheres that I've worked in for decades now: foster care and and guardianship, of elder guardianship. In foster care, we had cases all over the United States in which children were being snatched out of their homes
Hmm.
for the flimsiest possible reasons. These aren't the children that you see on the front pages who are murdered by their parents. We had children snatched out of the homes for supposedly the home not being clean enough. When I
Mm.
had been in that home and it was immaculate, supposedly for children having head lice, which unfortunately, no matter how well you take care of your children, when they are exposed to other children, they can get head lice.
Yep. Yeah.
We had so many cases in which children's lives were destroyed through being taken from the home by something called child protection.
Mm.
Well, child protection isn't always, sadly, child protection. These
Right.
kids were hostages. Their parents didn't know where they were, what was happening to them. There were medical decisions made for them, major decisions, and the parents had lost control. And many of our families actually went bankrupt. And I'm not talking just the parents who went bankrupt trying to fight for their children. I'm talking about the grandparents who went bankrupt
Mm.
trying to fight for their grandchildren.
Mm.
Now, in terms of elder guardianship, we have a system in which elders all over the United States are being secreted in nursing homes under lockdown. And
Mm.
their lockdown, I am not exaggerating, is far worse than habitual criminals.
Mm.
They have no
Mm.
communication systems, they have no visitors, they have no outings, no exercise, no reading materials, no puzzles. I mean, nothing. They
Mm.
rot in these nursing homes in lockdown for years. I
Yeah.
just finished a book actually last night on exactly this situation that we have in the state of Florida, but it is nationwide. So, do I see the elements of the Holocaust in terms of brutality against completely innocent, good, wonderful people? Yes.
Mm. Mm. It reminds me, coming off of COVID, which we really haven't come off of it because they continue to perpetuate the problem. I thought about, we were getting emails from parents in school districts across the country that were being told that they had to sign a waiver while their children were in their virtual classrooms. Now, that virtual classroom could be the child's bedroom, it could be the kitchen table, but the parents had to sign a waiver basically stating that they promised they would not sit in their child's virtual classroom to protect the rights of the other, or the privacy rights of the other students in the class. And when I saw this, of course, we were outraged, and we launched a public campaign telling parents and citizens, do not sign any waiver, because this threat, as it said in the waiver, that if the parent signs this agreement and they violate the requirements of the waiver, that the child could be removed from their virtual classroom. Well, it didn't explain what that virtual classroom was. Was it or how they were going to remove the child from that virtual classroom? Were they going to come to the house and physically remove the child? Or were they going to deny the child a right to education under COVID in their virtual classroom? And of course, we went public with that. And of course, that whole issue died down because the school districts were fearful because the parents were beginning to find out what was going on. And even in these nursing homes, since COVID, we found out what was going on in New York and in other places under Cuomo. You're absolutely right. But what people need to understand is, as you said, Dr. Newman, this is not the first time we are being made aware of this. This has been going on for a long time. And as we're getting ready to wrap up and close, but I would never call General Dwight D. Eisenhower a prophet. But if you think about it, it was prophetic what he said when he was liberating the concentration camps. And he told those who were with him to document everything. And he was telling them this because he said, someday some bastard's going to come along and say this didn't happen. And now, Dr. Newman, I am shocked that our generation is actually living during a prophetic time that General Eisenhower warned us about.
And he also warned us about the military-industrial complex. So he knew a lot of inside information that we're still not privy to now. But he did give us some good warnings, and he was at Dachau filming when I believe my dad was there as well. My dad's final concentration camp was Dachau. That was one of the places that Eisenhower visited, filmed, and we have a book of his findings at Dachau. So what he gave us in terms of warnings was very important. In our Bible, in terms of warnings,
yes,
is
right.
imperative and urgent.
Absolutely.
We have to, as you said, tell your children about it. We have to, so that our children are prepared,
right,
psychologically,
right,
to address a world that is mad. How do you help children to reconcile in their heads madness?
yeah.
They see people, the same person who says shots, masks, social distancing, and believe me, I'm not saying that I don't wear masks, because I still do. I still social distance, etc. But that same person on television is nose to nose, literally, in crowds of hundreds with no mask, obviously no social distancing. We know that there are breakthrough cases all the time of the COVID. I have a friend who's a teacher who has been in the hospital almost continuously, or nursing homes, for the past few months, over and over again, with ramifications.
Wow.
And she did have the vaccines, all of them. So our lives, very, very literally, are in the hands of God Almighty.
Amen. Amen.
We need to realize that. We have to be as prudent and wise as possible, but we also know that the wisest man on earth, King Solomon, towards the latter part of his life, was not completely, but was led astray by his wives. So that's an important lesson to us. No matter how wise we are, no matter how devoted, no matter how conscientious, we have to be aware of the propaganda in our midst that is really destroying our society and the mentality, the mindset of the entire world.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been just amazing and such an incredible interview. Dr. Newman, I want to thank you so much. How can people follow your work and learn more about the history of the Holocaust? I just want to let our audience know that we are working fast and furiously on finishing the edits of Outrage, which is a documentary about Dr. Newman's family, her father, his life, his experiences in the Holocaust. It's incredible and compelling and heart-wrenching. But ladies and gentlemen, I just want to encourage you to follow Dr. Newman. Dr. Newman, how can people learn more about the work that you're doing?
We have a website, thealcatzcenter.org. ThealcatzCenter.org. That is one way. And I've written a whole series of books, K through 12, called Holocaust Babies, which I believe are a key to reaching our students at all levels with the important messages of the Holocaust. Plus, we have the outrage films coming out, and one is going to be live streamed this Friday morning through PJTN. And we have study guides. We have a wealth of PowerPoints. If you need PowerPoints, you can contact us at help, HELP, elders, ELDERS, at hotmail.com, so that we are able to provide materials for homeschools, classrooms, churches, synagogues, and civic groups, etc. We are happy to adapt or create new programs according to the messages that you want to convey and the populations that you serve.
That's fantastic. And just as a little correction, on this coming Friday, this podcast will be released. If you are on pjtn.org, if you're getting our emails, you will get a notification to listen to this podcast. You can share it with your family and friends. And then the outrage documentary, we are trying to complete that quickly so that we can get that to you. It will come out also. If you are on our mailing list, you will get a notification Sunday morning. That's this Sunday morning. These two programs are being brought to you to remember November 9th, as Dr. Newman just mentioned, is the anniversary of Kristallnacht. So we are releasing this podcast and this documentary film for us to remember. So gather your children, your grandchildren, your friends, neighbors, listen to the podcast, watch the film, and have a conversation. Talk about what you've learned. And what your community has learned. This is all important information we need to learn from the past. And so, Dr. Newman, thank you again for joining us. I look forward to having you back on the program. There is so much to discuss. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to thank you all. You've heard the facts. And as PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to warn our family, friends, and neighbors about this existential threat to our communities and our Jewish communities. How will God judge us for standing by as the world, even Christian leaders, accept the disinformation of Holocaust education and indoctrination of our children in our local classrooms against these historic truths? We cannot remain silent. God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman. And the watchman has a duty when the watchman sees the enemy advancing, that they are to sound the alarm. They are to warn the inhabitants of the city. And a way that you can do that is by sharing this podcast with your family and friends. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us that silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. In closing, don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation about taking back local control of our community and our children's education. I also want to remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this mission for just $20 a month. PJTN is on the front lines and in the headlines, but we can't do it without your faithful financial support and prayers. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. I want to leave you with a word of encouragement in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 1 through 4, where God told Moses that when you see the enemy advancing and you see horses and chariots more numerous than you, he tells us, do not be afraid, do not lose heart, because the Lord our God goes with us to fight for us against our enemies to save us. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.